Nashville Design Week is a platform for bold collaborations and conversations that promote idea sharing, engage and educate the public, and strengthen our city's design culture. We shine a spotlight on designers who are shaping the city's future and facilitate critical conversation about the industry's growth and impact.
2020 has challenged us in every way. A tornado, a pandemic, and a long overdue reckoning with racial inequity. And as we close in on a formative election, we are excited to focus on the power of design to reshape communities and to actively support equity. We are proud to introduce a diverse range of speakers covering everything from racial injustice and inequity to diversity and inclusion, connectivity, and allyship, all through the lens of design.
We are fortunate to partner with design leaders who are invested in the future of Nashville's design community. These leaders see Nashville Design Week as essential and support making design discourse accessible to all. Thank you endlessly to our 2020 sponsors for helping us bring Nashville Design Week to life. Thank you to founding silver sponsor, Hastings. Hastings is a boutique architecture and interior design firm of 75 professionals who are deeply committed to the service of clients, producing award-winning, thoughtful, and impactful architecture. Thank you to silver sponsor, Watkins College of Art and O'Moore College of Architecture and Design at Belmont University. The Watkins College of Art and the O'Moore College of Architecture and Design celebrate the power of art and design to transform people, communities, cultures, and the world. Thank you to our copper sponsors, Elevated Outcomes, Interface, Smith G Studio, and Textures Nashville. Thank you to our bronze sponsors, Aberdeen Studio, Alfred Williams & Company, Circa Creative Studios, Dade, EOA Architects, Earl Swenson Associates, and Manuel Zeitlin Architects.
And thank you to our media partners, Dezeen, Lightning 100, and Nashville Interiors, and to creative directors Lindsay and Alan Lassiter.
Nashville Design Week is proud to be a fiscally sponsored project of the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville, a nonprofit organization. Nashville Design Week is an entirely volunteer effort made possible by the tireless dedication of our team. Now, let's get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Terry, and I'm a volunteer program coordinator for the Nashville Design Week 2020. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the NDW team, I'd like to welcome you to Diversity and Sustainable Fashion, Accessibility and Exclusivity. The hosts for today's program are Camila Sanders. Hi, Camila, the founder and CEO of Greater Than Equal. We also have Harry Sun, the owner of a local bespoke tailoring shop, Harry Clothing. And today's moderator will be Manny LeGrare of the Commonwealth. We thank all of you for being a part of Nashville Design Week 2020. And with that, I'll turn it over to Manny.
Thank you so much. We forgot one panelist today, Ethan. Ethan Summers is the owner of Oil and Lumber, a clothing and furniture making company here in Nashville as well. Good morning, Ethan. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We just have a series of questions that we're going to ask all our panelists today. And then after that, if we have time for some Q&A, we'll take some questions from the attendees. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and then we'll reference it later on in the conversation, and it may add to what we're saying. Sound good? All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Like she said, our topic is equity in sustainable fashion, and from accessibility to exclusivity. So we want to base the conversation around that. So go ahead and get started. This is a question for all panelists this morning. So we'll start with Camila. What is your definition of sustainable fashion? And how do you fit into this space and what you do?
Yeah, so to me, sustainable fashion is about values. So a lot of times when it's defined, a lot of people say, oh, is it a trend? They talk about purchasing a pricey item that's sustainable, but it's not just about that. Sustainable fashion is about your values and what you choose to do. It's about a way of life. It is not an option. In a sense, like if you make it an option, then it's easy to go back and do something else. But if you think about kind of the word sustainability and kind of how Black and Brown people have been doing it from the beginning, it's really about values and your relationship to people and also the earth.
Harry, what would you got for us?
So my definition, I think lately I've been thinking a lot about what sustainability means and what sustainable fashion means. And I really feel like we should be more strict with our definition of it. I think sustainable fashion is a fashion company whose input and output net zero. So whatever resources they use, whatever comes out, it all gets replenished. And I think that definition should be super strict. I think a lot of fashion companies say that they're sustainable. And to me, that just kind of means that they're keeping the environment in mind. But I think true sustainability is something that we're all trying to reach. And I think to get closer to it is better. Yeah.
You want me to hit on this? Is this me? Am I up next? Okay, cool. I think obviously everything that both the other panelists have said is 100% true. I actually we haven't talked about that part, Harry, but I do think that's great. I think that goal in mind is what all sustainable brands that are trying to get to that point need to be thinking about and wanting to strive towards that net zero and having it just be basically have no impact and actually making maybe the environment better instead of just having no impact. I think that's at least our goal. But one other part that I like that both of you have said is like, we're trying to get there. I think because we're such small brands, I think a lot of companies that want to try get really scared because they're not at that net zero. But for me, my definition of sustainability is being able to have as low or zero impact on the environment, and also thinking about like socioeconomic, like people, and how you can ethically keep a sustainable community of people within your company and your customers, to where you're thinking about ethics and everything else besides just like the environmental impact. So that's kind of what we think about every time we make a new item or design something. We're always thinking about economic, socioeconomic, and then also like environmental impacts of all of our items. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to build stuff that makes the world better and across all of those three platforms. So that's kind of my rough definition, but I do like the strict definition of what you said, Harry. I think that's super important to kind of keep that main goal as a kind of the peak of where we want to be.
All right, Ethan, you kind of touched on it. I know we've had previous conversations about sustainability and what you do. So I want you to start us on this next question. Walk us through your journey as kind of a sustainable designer and brand, and what obstacles, I guess, have you had to face in trying to reach that goal? And then after he speaks, we'll go to Harry and then to Camila.
Cool. Yeah, I think we didn't necessarily start as a brand that was really claiming to be a sustainable brand. I think a lot of companies nowadays start, and that's like their marketing ploy, is the fact that they're like ethical, recycled items, sustainable. For me, I wanted just to make really cool items, apparel and furniture, both hand in hand. But the ticket later on was like, wow, we should just make these things sustainable, because that's what I think every company should do moving forward. I think that in the next 20 years, hopefully, every company, that will be like the standard. That'll be the industry standard, is you have to reach these sustainability marks, and that's just like the law. So for me, I saw that as not as a trend, but I saw that as like, wow, everyone should be doing this. So I started to research more into textiles and the impacts, and seeing like landfills full of just clothes, and how companies would burn piles of clothes before they just gave them away and helped people that don't have items. It's just crazy. So we started to think about that probably after the first 6 to 7 months of starting to do cut and sew, because we were seeing all the scraps that we were cutting and throwing away. And I was like, man, if we're going to have to like grind these up or get rid of these, I want it to be able to be biodegradable and actually go into the earth and not harm the earth and the water. And so we kind of started with it not being a major factor. And then now it's like, it's a huge pillar of what our company is. And I kind of don't want to move forward unless we're sustainable in some capacity. I still get wearisome because I research as much as I can with the time I have. I'm the only one that does the sustainability research at our company. But I try to do the best we can. And it's been fun to kind of learn and see how many innovative products are coming out that look great, work completely as good as or better than the original products, and then are sustainable. So for me, I just want to make really cool things and have the sprinkles be the fact that it is made from a sustainable fabric. It's using ethical practices. We pay our people really well, higher than industry standards. So it was just all these things I wanted to do for my employees and do for the company ended up being like this cool, sustainable thing. that wasn't really a marketing ploy. We didn't do it to be cool. We just did it because we felt like it was right. And that's just kind of how we've grown into it. And we try to get better each season. I feel like we are, but we definitely make mistakes when it comes to that stuff, because there's so much, like, we'll talk about it later, I think, is like greenwashing. And there's so much information out there that you don't necessarily always know what's perfect and what's not perfect. So for us, that's kind of how it started, was make items. We slowly and surely got to the point where, like, wow, these should just be more sustainable. We should use recycled fabrics because they're great. They look awesome and they function just as well as the other stuff.
Am I next? I've lately been thinking a lot about sustainability and my business. So I am a bespoke tailor. I make custom clothing in Nashville. How the process works is I meet with a client, take their measurements, I'll make a pattern just for them, and then they pick a cloth. I order cloth from a fabric company or a mill. I try to work directly with mills as much as possible, just because then I can really understand what their process is like and how they make cloth. And I really like developing relationships with mills as well, and trying to find really small mills in the middle of nowhere in Scotland and things like that. So order the cloth. The cloth is shipped. Usually these mills are in Europe. So the cloth is shipped from Europe to me. I cut it out, baste it up for fittings here in Nashville. We'll do the fittings here. And then I work with a workshop in Italy, in Naples, and I send them the cut pieces. Once they're all ready to go, I will send the cut pieces to Naples, and then they will make it up there, and then they will ship it back to me, and then I'll do a final fitting. That doesn't sound sustainable at all. Just because it involves so much shipping. And I think I really want to be sustainable. I work with some mills that are definitely sustainable. And I actually wanted to show you guys. So Ardelanish, they are in Scotland, and they have these beautiful sheep that they shear, and they don't the sheep are different colors. So this is a brown sheep, and then they'll use that for brown cloth and different things like that. But try to work with these mills, and but my process doesn't feel sustainable just because I rely so much on shipping. And that's something that I think manufacturers, tailors, all kinds of people need to work together so that we can have production in the US, so that we can weave cloth in the US. And I think in some ways I'm sustainable in that I make custom clothing. I use very little cloth. I use just enough cloth for that one garment. But in other ways, with the shipping and also with not having skilled labor in the US, I feel like I'm not very sustainable, but I am aware of that, and I'm trying to work towards being more sustainable.
Yeah, so first I want to say, Harry, you're being hard on yourself. So I would like just the fact that, Harry, you go and you talk about like your supplier and things like that, and you're very selective, and you know that they have sustainable practices. I think that says a lot. And just the fact that you just kind of went through the whole thing, you were able to go through it quickly and you were able to identify like who you work with. Like most big brands can't even do that, you know, and the suppliers that they do use are not sustainable. So we'll get into that. And I think, you know, we'll get into too that sustainability is not like you're not going to be 100%, but you're always going to try your best to do that. And that goes for consumers, and it goes for brands, and it goes for designers too. As far as my sustainability journey, I have always been into fashion, but sustainability really like wasn't a thing when I was like going to college. You know, it wasn't like you could get a degree in sustainable fashion like you can now, which is amazing. So it's really took a lot of researching, and even in environmental movements, even, you know, owning your own fashion or design store, like there weren't a lot of Black and brown people represented in those spaces, not like it is today. And even today, a lot of those voices are just overpowered by people that don't look like us. So I think, now it's a great time. But that's kind of an insight into my journey a little bit.
Yeah. Can I also touch real quick, Manny? Harry, you totally one up me, and Camila, you too. This is great. I just assume everyone knows our process. So that is awesome that you gave like your trajectory of how you actually walk through your product process. That was very informative to me because I actually didn't know how you did everything. And same thing with you, Camila. I'm like, that's interesting. Sustainability has always been a thing since I was in college as like a buzzword class or whatever. But I think that same thing for us, we do a pretty similar process, Harry, and I think that we have those shortcomings. Whenever you order something from our website, everything's made to order. So we don't have like inventory just waiting on racks. Like whatever you see here behind me is actually just fittings. So if people want to come try on a medium in one style, we try to have one so then someone can try it on. But when you order it, we make one at a time. So we don't batch and do like 50 jackets at one time. We'll actually make one jacket for Harry, you want a cloth in medium, you'll order it on our website. We'll roll out the fabric. We'll cut it. We'll sew it. I'll email you, ask you a couple questions, make sure like your sleeve length, you don't have short or long arms, and we'll adjust things needed. That way we're not having inventory that ends up in the garbage or having to go on sale per se. So we only make the units that get ordered. We ship things from all over the world because we don't have a lot of local mills. I feel like that's an old school way that wasn't like a buzzword, like you said, Camila, is everyone kind of used to be sustainable because they bought things locally, like mills were just down the road or within 100 miles of their factory. And now you have to source stuff from Japan and Europe and other countries that are doing it probably a little bit better than we are on the mill side of things. Like if you want to get wool, you just have to go to New Zealand or England pretty much. But again, the impact of shipping that stuff across the globe is tough. I ordered this material one time and it was really tough because it was recycled plastic bottles and the company that made the yarn was in North Carolina, but they ship it all to China to make the board shorts. And that's where everyone gets everything manufactured. So I was having to buy material from a US company in China. So they would ship it to China. They would make the material, then they would ship it back to me. So I hear that impact and I'm like, why can't I just buy it from North Carolina? Like, 400 miles away. But that's just like the supply chains we've built. And I always try to rest in the sense that I'm hoping that eventually there's enough demand that they quit shipping it over there in some regard and then just ship it directly to here. And we're so small, I don't think we can change an industry. But if enough of us do it, or it just takes a few of those bigger brands you touched on, Camila, to start doing that, then it's like industry change instead of us just being these like 4 or 5 person teams that feel like we can't really like make an impact. So yeah, I think that was great. Sorry, I just wanted to touch on our process because you did such a good job, both you guys, and I felt like kind of fell short on that one.
Not to make this the Harry show, but Harry, I agree. I think you're being modest. I think, the act of what you do, the fact that I can bring clothes to you to have them repaired, is sustainable in itself. I don't have to throw my pants away. I can just get them taken in or let out a little bit. That's sustainable in itself. Ethan, the same thing with you. I can bring things and get it repaired, so I think both of you are making great strides in.
Can I touch on something just a second now that you mentioned that? Another way where I feel like I am sustainable is that a lot of the clothing I make allows for the garment to be changed during the course of that person's life. So I purposefully add in larger seam allowances so that if someone gains weight, loses weight, I can let it out, take it in. And of course, I make repairs on garments during the whole lifetime of the garment and of the client. I think that's just part of reaching towards sustainability is just, I guess, overall, just buying less clothes, focusing on well-made clothing. And then for me, making sure that well-made clothing can last the whole life of this person who's wearing it.
All right, perfect. So next question, we're going to jump. And I love the fact that this panel is a minority-based panel. So it kind of adds to the discussion of our topic and kind of the focus of National Design Week this year. So The next question is, how has ethnicity or your own ethnicity, influenced what you do? And how have you broken barriers in your ethnicity and culture to produce what you produce? We'll start with Harry this time, and then we'll move to Camila and then Ethan.
So when I think of my ethnicity culture, so wait, did we agree that I'm second generation or first generation? I forget. So my parents, what? I forget. So my parents were born in South Korea and immigrated to the United States in the 80s. And so, wait, is that second generation? First generation. Okay. So first generation. And for some reason, I always think of that scene from The Sopranos. I forget which guy in The Sopranos it is, but he's like, you Koreans, you and your small businesses, you always create these businesses in America. Anyways, that's where I feel like my parents own a dry cleaners. And I feel like that's where I trained in London, and trying to find an apprenticeship on Savile Row was extremely difficult. Number one being that they are very reluctant to take on women just because they view them as a flight risk. And this was true maybe 4-5 years ago. And so, and then being an American, actually, they were reluctant to take me on just because they knew the difficulty in me being there, and they'd have to sponsor me and different things like that. Anyways, it was hard to get an apprenticeship. But when I came back to the US, I worked for some tailors, and then I realized that, I want to follow in the tradition of my parents, and I want to open a small business, and I want to create something new. And I feel like I would not have had the courage to do that without them doing it. And they've supported me the whole way. And I feel so grateful for all of that support.
Yeah, so I think that we're all breaking barriers just by being in this space, because you don't see a lot of Black and brown people in this space, period. So I think just any time that you are in a space that you don't normally see people like you're breaking a barrier. For me personally, I also think, we have a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, and that is a barrier in itself, just because when you're working outside of the system, outside of just not necessarily fitting in and working with someone else or for someone else, but being an entrepreneur and working outside of the system, you're able to be more creative. You're able to use your voice a lot more than you normally would. So I think in those instances, you are breaking barriers and just putting yourself in a space where it's not always the easiest, it's not always the most comfortable space, but doing that. And that's something that I constantly do is make sure that I put myself in those spaces and have a voice, or speak for other people that don't necessarily have a voice.
I love those. I love both those answers. Those are great. I think that I am third generation. I'm half Japanese, half Caucasian. I'm third generation, which is called Sansai. It's like they have a name for the generations in the US. Second generation is Nisai. Sounds super cool in Japanese. But yeah, I come from a lineage of a lot of small business owners. I think 100 plus years ago, everyone, 50 to 100 years ago, everyone had small businesses, and they weren't entrepreneurs. They were just people trying to make a living. And then my parents' generation was the boomers, where they wanted to essentially just make as much money and make life as easy as possible to supply a good life for their kids. And my dad, I did the same thing. I left college and started working at this corporate job because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was tinkering with the things I'm doing now, but not at this level. And I didn't think I could make it a business, and slowly kept looking more into my grandparents on both sides, my dad and my mom's side. My mom's the Japanese side. My dad's the South Chicago, like blue collar worker. And they all ran businesses. And I kept thinking, like, why don't I just do this? I don't need to be making some tech company or some 10 times net income brand. So I was like, I just want to make stuff And if I can make enough to live, I'll be fine. And I think a lot of that came from my lineage and talking with my parents, and they were fully supportive because they grew up like farming. That's my mom's side. She farmed in the fields in Utah, and they farmed onions and sugar beets and hundreds of acres. So she was always instilling that hard work in me. I think Japanese people are super stubborn, and maybe just Asians in general are very stubborn who work really hard, like almost work too much to a fault. Yeah, like Harry's shaking her head, but she knows. So it's a thing where that was definitely instilled in me. And I feel like that's one of my best traits, is the fact that I work really hard. But I even selfishly wanted to know more about my culture because I didn't know as much about the Japanese side as I'd wanted to. So I feel like every generation you get farther away from your culture, you lose a little bit. And I wanted to know more. And I have a kid now, and I want to teach him more about his culture and his life. And that's where I've kind of engulfed myself. And a lot of the garments we do that are Japanese inspired come from like my family lineage, or I've seen it in a picture of an area where my grandfather's from in Japan, and things like that, where you're excited to learn more about the food, the culture, the clothing. And then I try to instill that in the brand. And for me, it's great because it's not just a story that sounds cool. It's actually like what I want to know about my past. So it feels genuine. I think people appreciate that. I think we'll touch on it later about transparency. And I think that's super important for our brands, is that we're doing this because we love it. And it also means a lot to us personally. Because if I was just making Japanese coats and didn't care about any of the other stuff, I feel like I'd probably burn out pretty quickly. But I rest pretty easy knowing, like, a lot of our jackets, I have one, it's like this big. When I was a 5-year-old, my mom made me one. And that's actually the first jacket we made into like an adult version. I just like graded the pattern up. So stuff like that not many people know, but I insert my culture a lot. I'm trying to more and more. And then a lot of the work jackets come from like the blue collar factory workers from Chicago that my grandfather grew up as a car mechanic, and things like that I influence into the brand. So I try to use both sides pretty equally. The Japanese side usually sounds a little bit cooler for the most part, but we do use both sides of my family, my culture, and kind of my upbringing. And I didn't really see myself as being a person that's representing a minority group, but it is exciting when I have people reach out and be like, that's so cool. You grew up half Japanese. I'm half Japanese. I live in Oakland, and this. And you're like, wow, that's like, I'm like inspiring to you. You're inspiring to me. Like, that's so cool. So it's pretty awesome. And then there's just a lot of other businesses I feel like nowadays that are minority owned that is exciting. And I feel like they have different, like, exciting, new, innovative ways to think of new garments and clothes and furniture items, and it's just cool to see. So I didn't realize I was breaking barriers, but thank you. I'm trying to break barriers. I'm just trying to do what we do, and hope, and being proud of where we come from is kind of what we try to do every day.
All right, perfect. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about something a little bit different. I know sustainable fashion, I think we've all gotten a good understanding of what that can be, what that looks like. So let's switch and talk about fast fashion, kind of the opposite of that. So fast fashion right now, if you're into, clothing and shopping and fashion and whatnot, it is kind of a buzzword, so how is sustainability different from fast fashion? And this time we'll start with Camila, and then we'll move to Ethan, and then we'll move to Harry.
Well, I guess, bottom line is that fast fashion is not sustainable. And I know we'll get more into it in the next question, but yeah, I mean, it's the pollution that comes with fast fashion that I'll talk about in the next question is just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the earth. It's not sustainable for people. And it's, in a sense, like fast fashion, it's not you don't get the same feeling when you have something, a piece of clothing that is created by someone out of good quality materials and is possibly handed down, like Ethan talked about that jacket, like there's so much value and so much emotion tied to that. Versus fast fashion is just like, oh, I bought this, it made me feel good for this second, and now I don't even like it anymore. So that to me is like the huge difference. Like, to me, you want things in your house, and on you that you value?
Yeah, I think for me, fast fashion is sort of the idea of like it's designed only to be used for a short amount of time. So it's like a really cool trend that looks awesome, but we all have those things we bought for like a Halloween costume per se, or that weekend 80s party at like a thrift store. But that's what fashion brands are doing right now for trends. So they're making things that only last a year. So because they know that, they're making it as cheap as possible. That means they're paying people usually like unfair wages. It's being made in factories out of materials that aren't like necessarily backed by any company. Like there's no FDA approving materials. It's just like could be woven plastics or whatever. You don't really know. And it's done so fast. And the reality is that's why a lot of these, like for instance, like Ross, all those places get so many extra items, and then landfills are full because they have to move that product so fast, and it's annual and it's even biannual. So the idea is like we're opposite because we want to make things like you said that gets handed down. Like I want people, we all have that jacket that like grandpa had or like your dad had, that when things are getting cleaned out, you're like, that's that jacket. Like I want that. And then your siblings like, no, but I want that. And I think those are things that usually that person said, oh, I paid a lot for that, or I got that from your grandpa. And I think that that's what we're trying to create, is almost not like necessarily heirlooms, but things that we want your kids to fight over at one point. And also, if you think about fast fashion too, you end up spending more on fast fashion because you might buy 4 or 5 blouses for each year versus one blouse that might cost more in the beginning, but 5 years later, you've only had to spend on one. So I tell a lot of people about that. It's like reducing your closet to having 10 things you truly love instead of 50 things you kind of like. And I think that's super important because for me, I would rather have 10 things that I feel like $1 million in and feel like I'm making an impact, being sustainable, but also feeling like I look really cool. I feel like most people, if they buy sustainable, they're like giving up the fact that fashion can look cool and can actually be like quality. Sustainability, I think, is the big thing that everyone wants to do, but they're like, yeah, but it doesn't look as good. It's like vegan. It's like buying meat, you know? Sorry, had a phone call on my laptop. I'm back. Can you hear me okay? Sorry. So yeah, it's kind of like buying those items now is just a little bit different. When you buy meat from the grocery store that's not real meat, you're like, it's not as good as meat, so I'm not going to give it up. So my point is, let's make things that are just as good, who look just as great, but also have that environmental impact, and you're not having to give up the cool factor or like the beautiful factor of the item. And I think that that's kind of where we find the fast fashion kind of overlay.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ethan. Everything you said. I think fast fashion kind of adheres to trends, and trends that change really quickly. So you'll see new things at Target or at Walmart all the time. And yeah, people totally end up buying that stuff and just throwing it away. And I feel like how I'm different is I make clothing that's kind of less affected by trends. And yeah, I totally agree with everything you said about people just need to, I think honestly, people just need to buy less clothes and wear less clothes. Like I make clothes, but I'm just saying buy less clothes. But the system is set up where it's so easy to buy fast fashion. It's so easy to go into a place like Target and they have some really nice dresses and really nice shirts, but it's so easy to go in and think, okay, I just need deodorant. And then you go and you're like, oh, this top's cute, or I need new leggings or whatever. And it's so cheap or it's not cheap, but it's affordable. And I think that's where we small companies that are doing production on a small scale in the US, we're paying our employees well. I'm paying myself a living wage. So I think that makes things more expensive. And I think that fast fashion is just so easy and so cheap. And I don't know, I'm going to introduce this slide where there's this idea of good, fast, and cheap, and how you can't have all three things at the same time. And I really think fast fashion is fast and cheap. Whereas I think we're trying to make good things, but you can't make those things quickly, and it's not going to be cheap. And I think that's something that we definitely need to address for clothing. And I think we're going to touch on that later, just the future things that we can do, action steps. But I really feel like if we can work together, then hopefully we can change things.
All right, the next question I have is for Camila. So, could you dive a little deeper into the necessity of being sustainable in fashion choices, kind of the impact that that choice or line of thinking can have, and then even talk about some benefits to communities and companies and whatnot to make sustainable fashion choices?
So to me, what I said is that, if you care about people, if you care about the planet, then this is why sustainable fashion is important. And you always hear about like climate change and things like that. And if you've ever been in the climate space, you probably heard that we only have 10 years to prevent irreversible damage from climate change. That's from scientists. And this is something that has been studied for over a century. So, and if you haven't noticed, even in Nashville, we had that tornado. Have you noticed it's been raining a lot more? The California wildfires, there's a picture of flooding in Miami. And then also the picture at the bottom right is refugees. And a lot of times you see this civil unrest, but the reason why people aren't just moving because, I think it would be great to move to another place. Like they're moving because where they are is unlivable. It's because of drought and things like that. So if you care about the planet, this is something that's happening now. We don't really have much time to address this, and if you think about just kind of the previous slide, if we're seeing that now, how is it going to be in the future if we don't address it, right? So what is fashion industry's impact on the climate crisis is huge. And people don't realize this because they don't see the back end of what happens with the fashion industry. But we talked about this a little bit about the pollution that happens with all the different dyes. And the reason why this stuff happens, this is fast fashion. Like this is not necessarily Harry doing dyes in her backyard with her clothing. Like that's not what this is. This is because we're making such a huge quantity, and these big companies are making such a huge quantity, and they're doing it at such low cost that they're not taking precautionary measures for these types of things. And so there's a lot of pollution. There's a comment about the microplastics. Yes, so when you wash clothes, there's microplastics that go into the ocean. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about that. And then just like this is staggering to me because we don't even wear our clothes or maybe we buy fast fashion and then it falls apart. So we just throw it away, So 85% of the clothing Americans consume, nearly 3.8 billion pounds, is sent to landfills as waste. That's just America, So it's, we need to have more of a circular model or wear our clothes longer. But a lot of this is because of fast fashion. Like Ethan said, when you go and you buy fast fashion, usually you can pick up like 10 different pieces or 5 different pieces or something like that. And then you throw it away or you got it so cheap. There's no stickiness to it because you got it so cheap. And so not only is it about the planet, but it's also about people. And I don't know how much you know, but a lot of people think that your clothes are made by a machine. They're not. They're actually made by people in a factory. So Ethan hinted at this before, that they don't get paid that much. And even in LA, which is in the United States, and in Bangladesh and all these different areas, it equates to like $2 an hour. And if you can imagine getting paid $2 an hour and working more than 40 hours a week and getting paid $2 an hour, you would not be able to put food on the table. And so a lot of the garment workers are just asking, like, can I just get minimum wage, you know? And it's not just the pay. It's also, so you might have, look it up, Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. It's where they lock the doors. This is in New York, and they lock the doors. And the reason why they locked the doors is because they were afraid of people stealing, and that building burned down and hundreds of people died. The Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, which was in 2013, same thing, the building codes for that building were not up to par, and they knew it, and factory collapsed. Thousands of people died. And you might think, oh, well, it's just, the factory owners that are not paying these people. But what is happening is that big brands are coming and they're saying, hey, I want you to make this shirt for me or the clothing for me. I want you to make it cheap. And if you don't make it cheap, then we're just going to go somewhere else, So, and they do not want to lose that business. So they continue to do that. And if you think about the fashion industry, just period, the way that it was built, and you think about slavery of Black people in America, picking cotton, like we weren't just picking cotton to pick cotton. That was a textile industry. So it's kind of fashion was built on the backs of Black and brown people, and it still is. It's built on the oppression of Black and brown people, and that is the system that we live in. And even cotton today, Indian farmers typically commit suicide, or a lot of them do. And even in as much pesticides as they use on cotton, that's hurting the neighborhoods as far as like mental health, birth defects, things like that. So there's a lot of social injustices that happen in fashion. And I will say too, if you think about H&M, if you think about Zara, if you think about all these fast fashion companies, think about how much their executives make, right? So I know there was a question in the chat, and we'll get to those, but if you're making billions of dollars over here, and the people that make the clothes make $2, they're not passing that down to the people that actually make the clothes. So if we could get them to actually pass that wealth down to the Black and brown people that are doing all the work, then that would solve the issue, right? But it's been a long time, and they have not done that. So in a sense, like, the system is broken. And these are just some references. I know we're not going to go like super deep into this, but these are references of people that I follow that are going to give unfiltered information about the social injustices in fashion and things like that, if you want to dig in deeper. But that's why you should care. And that's just like a light 5-minute spiel on why you should care.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, Camila, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but the question from Julia about why it's better to buy quality products less often is actually better for the industry globally. You kind of started touching that, but if you could, answer that question, I think that'd be great to kind of add on to the end of your conversation you just had.
Yeah, I think that whatever consumers do, it sends a message to the bigger brands. So if you are saying, hey, I'm not going to buy fast fashion anymore because of these reasons, and I'm going to buy local, it's going to mess up their system that they have, right? It's going to disrupt their system. And so they react to those different things. They're like, oh, well, that's why there's a lot of greenwashing now, because they're like, oh, we need to react to this because people aren't going to go for this anymore. And there's even like Remake, Fashion Revolution. They talk about the garment workers garment workers' rights. There's a lot of things that are going on that people are demanding that they're not going to stand for this anymore. So if you make the choice, the companies are going to adjust, and they're already starting to try to adjust just because consumers aren't going to put up with this anymore. So I think that the actions that you take by not buying fast fashion, trust me, as soon as their profits start going down, they're going to they're going to they're going to start making those shifts. If we highlight the fact of what's going on within the garment worker industry, they're going to start saying, oh, okay, well, let me make sure that my supply chain is like this. Let me be more transparent. Let me actually say that I know what factory I'm going at, and this is how much I'm paying people. Like, you demanding that stuff and making stuff, they're going to do it. Consumers have a lot more control in that way than you think.
Yeah, do you mind if I touch a little bit on what I think, Manny? Thanks for the questions. These are great. These are questions that are like kind of stunting me a little bit, but I think that I guess I have never really thought about in this much depth how it affects the global job workforce. I think that the idea right now, I think with COVID, is it's actually done a reset on a lot of these brands. I think that, like you talked, Camila, you basically have buying power with your dollar. You send a big message to companies how you're spending it. I think that right now the idea is there are a lot of people making clothing, and I think if you make less clothing, obviously jobs won't be there as well. But I do think a lot of those people are being underpaid, like you talked about. So the idea is to spend your dollar at other places that are making things ethically. Their demand goes up, they'll have to hire more people. So I've actually worked with Patagonia on the furniture side, and they make a lot of their clothing in India through fair trade programs. And their demand is already exceeding what they can produce. So they're trying to hire more people, and they're paying those people correctly. Those are the jobs that we need to increase. And I think buying clothing from places like Harry, me, and there's a million other, like I listen to Conscious Chatter. That's one of the companies you said to listen to their podcast. Listen to their podcast, and they feature a new designer every week. And those brands are the ones that need to grow. Like, I want to hire more people, but we need more people to buy our clothing. So I think that you're right. I think it's a worry that it could, in the short term, reduce jobs. But the idea is to eventually have those jobs come back, just with the right companies. I don't have the answer to how that works from like a global economic scale, but I think that there needs to be a reset. I think a lot of these brands right now are going out of business because of COVID, because of the systems that are set up. They've made millions and millions of dollars of inventory, and now they're stuck with all of it, and the retail stores can't sell it, and so on and so forth. So I think that, the jobs being lost is actually it's like they've dug their own grave in some capacity, but there's people behind those. We don't want those people to lose jobs. So I think that skilled work will find a home. It just needs to be done the right way. And I don't know how exactly that is. I just think that might be a solution. But yeah, go ahead, Harry.
It's like school. I raised my hand. So the question from Julia is, why is buying higher quality products less often better for jobs in the industry globally? And I think this touches on, I wanted to bring up what you do, Ethan. You said it's made to order, correct? So if someone purchases something on your website, it'll go into production, and then you guys will start working on it.
Yeah.
And I think
we roll out a medium pattern and cut it out for you.
Yeah. And I think that's actually so different from huge production, from bigger production and bigger companies, because for efficiency's sake, they will cut out maybe thousands of mediums all at the same time. But if I order from you, you are taking the order. That's one job. Then someone else takes out the pattern, maybe adjusts it, maybe not. That's a second job. Then someone takes that pattern, cuts it out. That's a third job. And then the person who cuts it out will pass it on to someone who sews it. And maybe there are a couple people involved in the sewing process. And so there can be jobs created with more people involved on a smaller scale. I wanted to introduce this book, and maybe this is a good time to do it, called Small is Beautiful, E.F. Shoemaker. And he talks about how if we use intermediate technology, then it's intermediate technology is people-centered technology. So a lot of these bigger production companies will rely on huge pieces of equipment. They'll rely on an enormous machine that's really expensive that will do the job of 20 people. But he's arguing that we need to strike a balance between machines and human labor that is accessible, that's using tools that are inexpensive, that are accessible, I guess. And then I wanted to show, so this is an example. I mean, I don't think everyone should be weaving with their feet, but this is an example of where more jobs can be created with smaller production, small scale production. Harris Tweed is a renowned company, and Harris Tweed is formed of a loose collection of home weavers. And so each individual has a small scale loom. They'll weave it. They use regional raw materials. There's one facility that finishes all the wool, and then they weave it, and then they sell it to Harris Tweed. Harris Tweed pays them for the cloth, and then Harris Tweed markets the cloth for them under this name. And I don't know how many of you guys know about Harris Tweed, but I think that's a great example of intermediate technology. Another is Harry Bryan. He's a guy who builds boats, and I think he's in Canada, and he argues for intermediate technology in woodworking, where he lives off the grid. Not everyone can live off the grid, but he's sustainable in that he cuts down trees in his area. He uses this technology that requires his own hand labor. And I think by using these different technologies, we can create more jobs. And I think if small scale production grows in the US, and if we can get a small mill that does smaller minimums of cloth, if we have smaller production facilities, a great example in Nashville is Prang Apparel. They are in Donaldson, and we're working with them to make some ready-to-wear pieces, but their minimum is 25. Whereas if I go to a different production company, their minimum is like 1,000. And so I think as these small-scale production manufacturing, as small-scale manufacturing grows in the US, I think we can create more jobs, and I think we can be working towards sustainability, and I think we can make a huge impact on the environment and on equity and on accessibility and everything, and it'll be great.
But I think that's a huge question that we have with our customers, is essentially, how can you afford the upfront cost for buying these higher end products? I think a lot of that is you don't have to start by doing it all. I think that we touched on in the beginning is starting small. So you may not be able to afford the awesome jacket that you have, but there are other ways to not necessarily buy from brands like ours in the beginning. You could buy a t-shirt, or you could buy something smaller to show that you're supporting. And that means that we can slowly grow our operations. And our goal is to reduce costs to make it accessible for everyone. But because we're smaller, things just cost more. I pay my people more money than the industry standard, so that is reflected in the cost of the garment. I think that the materials cost a little bit more because they're not as readily available to everyone. So sustainable fabrics cost more money than generic fabrics because they're organic, because they take a little bit longer to create. There's less companies, so the supply and demand of them the demand is now getting higher, but the supply is still really small. And I hope eventually that starts to level out. But I think for people, we also even offer like payment schedules for garments. Like you can utilize Afterpay on our website if you want to buy it in 4 installments instead of paying for upfront costs of it in the beginning. But I think for us, it's always a conversation that I tell people, yeah, it may cost you, $300 to buy a jacket, where you could buy one for $100, and maybe getting that first one isn't right. But the idea I tell people is like, well, just either find something upcycled, find something you want right now, or find something small and just slowly start to integrate your closet. The idea of like wiping all your clothes out and going and buying everything is actually like worse. You should slowly integrate and change over, because all that stuff's going to end up in the landfill again. So I don't have a 100% answer for you, but usually I tell people that are like, most of our customers end up saving for like a year to buy something. And then when they buy it, they appreciate it. They treat it better. It lasts longer. And then they also 2 years later buy something from us instead of buying something from me every 2 months. So I just want to make sure we touched on that question. There's like 30 more questions below, but I'll let Manny kind of drive from here.
Just a quick comment about the global jobs. Just like Harry and Ethan were saying, why are we paying people? Like, there's no way that you can build wealth making $2 an hour. You're just going to be continuously in the system. But if you teach people how to have their own businesses and make their own textiles and things like that, and create those smaller scale systems like Harry was talking about, and then they can build wealth from there, just not on a huge, scale, but they can build wealth and not be within that system. So there's a ton of different solutions besides even just paying people more.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think the conversation is kind of leading to kind of the meat of what we wanted to get to today, which was equity, and inclusivity in the sustainable fashion. So my next question, kind of looping in, I forget who asked this question. Someone in the chat, Emily, asked a question and then I saw some more comments about this in the chat. So do you guys feel that there is an equity problem in sustainable fashion? I think, Camila, you kind of touched on that with the cotton picking of slavery days. And, we've talked kind of weaved in and out of it. But do you think there's an equity problem in sustainable fashion? And how do we get more people involved in sustainable fashion? So kind of to answer Emily's question, and then some other people have talked about, affording to buy it and all those other sorts of things. So we'll start with Harry this time, and then we'll jump to Camila, and then we'll jump to Ethan.
Hey, so yes, there's an equity problem. I think the clothes I make are very expensive, and they are expensive because of the cost of cloth, because of how much I pay my workshop in Naples, because of shipping costs. It's expensive. And I think what Ethan said about setting up different payments is a way to make it more accessible. I guess I don't have a good answer. I think that by education, and that by making things, just letting people know, hey, you're welcome here, I think is something I've been trying to do. I know, just being like a young female Asian tailor, I do get a lot of clients who would not necessarily go to the traditional kind of like old white tailor. And that's been really cool to see. A lot of women reach out to me. I've made things for people who aren't gender conforming. And that really excites me, that people are comfortable meeting with me and we make things together. But I think overall, when I think of sustainability, when I think of organic, when I think of things that are good for the environment, it all sounds expensive, and it all sounds like things that most people can't afford. And I don't have a good answer for how to solve these things, but I think by focusing on building up regional wealth, having more resources available to our community, different things like that, I think we can work towards it.
And Camila, before you and Ethan speak, I was reading through some comments from Miss Curry, I believe. So could we also include conversation on accessibility? So for BIPOC people, Black and Indigenous people of color, larger bodies, how can we make what we do more inclusive and accessible to not only people who can afford it right out, but people who don't fit kind of the mold of the perfect body or the perfect skin color or anything like that. Could you guys speak to those issues as well?
Yeah, so just my own personal journey, because I've probably been at multiple income levels. My family was not rich, so we thrifted. We had hand-me-down clothes. Like, that was just a way of life. My mom sewed our clothes, So those, remember, sustainability is not about buying something, So you can upcycle, you can rent. A lot of people are doing that. You can thrift. You can make your own clothes. There's so many different things to be sustainable. You can wear your clothes longer. You can not be ashamed to say, hey, yeah, I wore this last week, but I'm wearing it again because I love it, and just, pay attention to the things that you buy and wear things that are good quality fabrics. And even when if I could get my hands on something that's designer, it would be at a discount. It would be because I bought it secondhand or I bought it from eBay or something like that. But I would cherish that item. Even now, I still will cherish that item. And if I get rid of it, I give it to, someone that I know can use it. So it's not like I just throw it away. So being kind of a middle income person, it's a sustainability that was just a way of life. So just speaking from experience, in a sense, it is accessible because I do all these other methods. And then if I do want to get a nice suit, then okay, well, I'm going to do that. But it's going to be something that I cherish and I keep for a long time. I think now when Zara came out, I was excited, right? I used to shop at Zara, but when you shop, those clothes are not even, they're like $40 a shirt, and when you go, you get like multiple items. You spend like 100 something, and then you wash it and then it lasts you maybe for 6 months, or it's so trendy that you don't want to wear it anymore. So I think that's somewhat of a myth sometimes, is that I think a lot of middle class people, they go and they do spend a significant amount of money, but it may not be on that single piece. It might be on a lot of different pieces. But one of the things, as far as like equity, of course, there's a problem across the board. Every industry, there's a problem. And like I said before, like I never saw a lot of Black and brown people in sustainable fashion. I never saw a lot of Black and brown people or designers and things like that. So I think as far as equity goes, I think it's about centering Black voices, because there are a ton of sustainable designers, not just Black, but Black and brown voices, because there are a lot of sustainable designers. We just don't hear about them. And I also think it has to do with education. I think we've gotten away from just knowing like the quality of our clothes, knowing how to sew, knowing how to operate a business. Like even Harry and Ethan, you talked about, or especially Ethan, about how that was in your family. And I think for a lot of other people, it wasn't, we don't know how to run a business or things like that. So these people that know how to do it, starting to get the way that you build equity is teaching other people how to do this. Like, hey, you want to be a designer? Let me teach you how to sew. Let me teach you how to build wealth being in a business, and things like that. I think that is how you start to build equity in sustainable fashion.
Well, I don't know how to follow that necessarily. That was a great answer. But I think that there's definitely a huge problem, I think, right now in equity in fashion and sustainability. And I think Manuel up here talked about Elizabeth Suzanne. She's a friend, I think, of most of ours when it came to sustainable clothing. She actually just closed recently because of COVID. But I think even looping back to our original question, like how do we get costs down? Like we were actually working on sourcing materials together, like informally. So there's a company called the New Denim Project that builds sustainable fabrics out of recycled cotton they fall basically on the shop floor of all these factories. They take them, grind them up, and recreate new yarns. And I couldn't afford the 10,000 yard minimum because I order like 50 yards. That's like 50 to 150 yards is kind of a lot for us. So Elizabeth was sweet enough to say, hey, like, we'll let you piggyback on if I order this material. Like, these are the 5 materials I'm getting. Do you want to just like split some up? And then there's other brands like Emily Design, who does fabrics locally, and Jamie and the Jones. Those are all brands that are all sustainable brands that do women's garments, but they're always open to working together. And I think that's a way to make things more, I guess, affordable, is to be able to work in community with other makers, and like I think that's originally why the Nashville Fashion Alliance like created a sort of like community. And I think that now it's like an informal one. We're all friends, but how can we kind of keep things as, I guess, if 5 companies come together, it's like 5 companies buying from one. Maybe you can afford the minimums, or like the minimum 24 units you have to get from Megan Prang is you might be able to loop in production with somebody else. And there are a lot of companies, I think, changing and already starting to do that. We couldn't get sustainable wool for a long time, and now there's a sustainable wool company that I found out of Seattle and Washington that is being able to supply me with like 5 yards, which before was like thousands of yards and cost me like I'd sell my car to like buy wool. So I think the equity problem is definitely real. I think that it's something that you're right. Educating people is huge, Camila. I think right now that's what I try to do. If someone comes into our store, even if they don't purchase anything or into our showroom, I'm able to tell them why we do it, how we do it. And I think that resonates a lot with people just like in their everyday life. Because I'm also saying it and I'm like believing it. Like personally, I'm not just saying it as a sales pitch. Like I'm trying to do it too. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to basically be more invested and actually do the things I say I'm going to do all the time because it keeps me accountable for my actions. So I think that you answered it great, both of you. So it's hard to kind of touch on some of the extra stuff, but I think that it is a problem. It is something that we talk about all the time here, very informally, but it's getting better. I think we can all agree right now is that we're working towards it and it's getting better, and slowly and surely we're trying to get more people involved, especially in the BIPOC community, is just being more open to it and working with more people that are wanting to make those things happen.
Go on.
You go.
Okay. I just want to address for, I think Curry had a question about a bigger body. So like I would love to see more people get into the movement, more designers get into the movement, because I think that's happened in general, in fashion in general. It's like everyone's not this thick, thin, person. So I definitely think that needs to happen more with sustainable fashion. So I would just love to see more people get into the movement, and that goes back to the education and the businesses and things like that. But I do want to, one of the references that I had was Aja Barber, and she actually does sustainable styling for people with bigger Black bodies. And one of the things that she mentioned was that there's a lot of people on Etsy and things that she works with to dress people like that. So I think that's something that definitely needs to happen, but we're seeing happen more and more.
Also, just on the topic of bigger bodies, I think one resource that's really good is finding a good alterations tailor. Someone who you can take something to, and maybe it's a piece of men's clothing, or maybe it's something that's way too big, but they can slim it down for you, or maybe they're able to let things out. I think finding a good alterations tailor is a way to make your to extend the life of your clothing, but also to find something at a thrift store where maybe you like the cloth or maybe you like the pattern, but it just fits really weird. Take it to an alterations tailor and ask them like, hey, can you do anything with this? And maybe they can work with you. And I also wanted to jump in and just say this sweater is from Brooks Brothers. I bought it 10 years ago. Since then, the buttons are broken. So I replaced the buttons. I just put it up to me. So I replaced the buttons. And then the elbows started to wear out. So I put elbow patches on there. But I think it's just little things that you can do to extend the life of your clothing. Is something that's important, is just knowing how to take care of your clothing. And yeah, that's important.
Perfect. We're going to jump. Sorry, Ethan, you want to say something?
No, I think we can jump. That's good. Sorry. Yeah, continue.
We're going to jump actually to Ethan, to you. What other problems or concerns do you have for sustainable fashion? I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but switching gears, what other problems or concerns do you have?
Well, I'll just talk about the things that we, I guess, have on a weekly, monthly, daily basis when it comes to, I guess, barriers for us as trying to be a sustainable brand. I think is the information we're given is really tough. I research and try to find new, unique textiles and fabrics. And there are a lot of people that are really aggressive on social media to where I'll source like recycled plastic bottle material called PET. I thought was, according to all these research and big brands, I try to follow what they're doing as a sustainable brand, and then I'll look into their fabrics and their research and try to do as much as I can with, the information that's given. And then a month later or a year later, they're like, actually, the impact of PET is worse. And then people will come back and say like, wow, you're using a terrible product. You're actually harming the earth. And you're like, oh, like, of course I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to do the best I can with what's given right now. And that's a barrier for me, is like the information. So I would love to have more unbiased information given from research companies showing textiles, what are the right ways to source it. And really, we're like in unpaved territory. Like we're out there like pathfinding a way to find textiles for small brands. And I feel like that's a big barrier for me, is just finding the textiles. I mean, we have textile agents that help us find fabric sometimes, but the reality is when I say sustainable, they're just like using that as a buzzword. And then they just look at a garment pack and they'll say like organic. But if I ask like, is it eco certified or GOTS or any of those certifications? They're like, yeah, for sure. I was like, I think that's because, Harry, you spoke about like talking to the mill. We go directly to the mill now because they know where the yarn comes from usually, and they know all the specifications. But sometimes those companies won't even talk to you because I'm too small. So I'll almost have to like sales them and be like, I'm going to order, 1,000 yards maybe. And then I'll get in the room and then I end up talking to someone. I tell them what I do and then they end up talking to me. But usually I get hung up on most of the time because I'm so small. So that's a barrier. I think right now it kind of sucks because I want to be able to do more sustainable items. Sorry about the noise, there's a compressor in the background. But we're making these new hats with a company in Dallas that is using organic cotton. So we're making organic cotton hats, which is really cool because I don't see those all the time. But the brims are built out of synthetic fiber. So the only company I know that's doing recycled, basically visors inside of the hat is Patagonia, and they use a company called Burrow. It's made out of fishnets. It's recycled fishnets that make the hat brim. Super cool. I contacted Burrow, and they're like, oh, we don't work with brands that small. So I'm like, so I'm trying to do it, but we can't afford it, or we don't have the buying power to necessarily do that all the time. But the goal is to start getting a hat that's 95% sustainable. And then after we have enough units and people are buying them and showing there's a demand for it, then we can slowly switch over and integrate it. Because if not, then I just don't make any hats. And then everyone else still buys the original old school style hat, which is made with non-organic materials. And it just ends up going down that path of like the same. So I think the stress is, do you do it all the way perfect, or do you do the best you absolutely can? Be transparent about it. Let people know how you're trying to be the best you can, and just not claiming to be perfect. I feel like that's a positive thing, but also a barrier, like you talked about, Manny. So those are the things I worry about. And then other brands actually living what they're saying, like doing it for the right reasons, not just because it's cool. I think that a lot of brands hopefully have leaders that are trying to be sustainable for the right reasons, not just to make more money. That makes me scared, because at the end of the day, a lot of brands just want to, it's a business. You want to make as much money as possible. And if they're public companies too, they want to make as much money for their stock shareholders and stuff. And that's what makes me nervous. But right now we're our barriers are information, access to fabrics, and also like the sizing question. We offer sizes for everyone. So if you're a size whatever, we will make you something. We would love to. I always just tell people to reach out directly, and I'll actually work on sizes for you. Like, we can make stuff, we'll measure it for you, we'll make whatever size you want. But for us to pattern a size, 40 different sizes, we will go out of business because we won't make anything. So the idea is, when those situations come along, we always like to talk with our customers and say, hey, like, let's work on a plan together. If you want a garment and you're this size, we can make it for you. Let's just go through that process. And I've never turned anyone away, ever. So the whole point, I think, is because we control our production and because we're smaller, we're able to do those unique situations and fit sizes for people that normally we couldn't. So hopefully that answers your question, Manny, and people. But yeah, there are definitely some barriers for sure. And I think that we all, if you're trying to be sustainable, have issues with it, because we're just, we're dealing with the cards we're dealt as best we can and trying to make leaps in ways that we might not have $1 million sitting in the bank.
Yeah. So my comment, to what Ethan said is that I think the biggest problem is greenwashing. And that's basically where, Ethan touched on this a little bit, but these larger brands are taking the word sustainability and they're like, oh yeah, we're sustainable. We have organic cotton. And there's all this other social issues and pollution and all this other stuff that's happening on their supply chain. And so I think the most sustainable thing that you can do is buy locally, because you can actually go in, like Ethan said, he works with his customers, Harry too. You get to see exactly what their supply chain is. They know who they're buying from. You go into Ethan's shop, and I know he didn't quite mention this, but you can see the clothes being made, So they're just buying local is the most sustainable thing. Oh, there we go. We get to see it. But yeah, buying local to me is the most sustainable thing, because you can actually see, you can ask questions, you can get to know the designer. And so that to me, I think is a barrier. And one thing too, there's a lot of certifications out there that's like B Corp and Higgs Index and things like that. Those things are like very expensive for a brand to buy into. So just because it says, oh, this brand is B Corp, or oh, we use organic, or oh, we are part of this Higgs Index, or whatever that is, like a smaller brand may not have the money to do that, but they're even more sustainable than someone that is certified. So shop local. That's all.
That's great that you said that. I was actually going there next, so that's a perfect segue. So yes, these certifications are very expensive and they're time consuming. So if one doesn't have these certifications, or I guess maybe the question is, do you feel like it's necessary when people are looking for companies to shop with that are sustainable, that are, conscious about these sorts of things? Do you feel like these sorts of certifications are end all be alls and necessary for people to look for to shop with companies? And we can start with Harry this time, and then maybe move to Ethan, and then Camille.
I think this kind of goes back to how I started with my definition of sustainability. And maybe that just goes back to education. Do your research. That's easy to say, but just talk with the people who you buy things from and find out what they're doing, and realize that true sustainability is very difficult to reach, but a lot of people are trying to get there and taking steps to get there. And I think it's important to recognize that. Yeah. But I think Camila and Ethan, maybe you guys know more about, I actually don't really know that much about the different certifications as well. Yeah.
Well, I know a little bit, just because people have asked me. Like, I think for me, the biggest thing is like challenging the companies you're buying from, not in like an aggressive, mean way. But I've had customers. I was literally trying to find this email from a customer he was from the UK, and he asked me like 10 questions that he says, I ask every brand I buy things from these 10 questions. And it was super cool. It was like, where do you source from? How many employees do you have? What's like your mission? And these are things you probably could find on a website, but he just usually sends it to like the info page. And he's like, if I don't hear back, then I know the customer service is bad. But he's like, if I hear back, then I get these 10 things. And it was great. And it was like, are you B Corp? Do you have these? And I essentially said, no, we are not. I would love to tell you what we do, though. And when you research the B Corp stuff, I think it's for larger brands. So if you see a massive company, if they have a B Corp certification, I don't think it should be undervalued, because at least they're making those steps to be accountable at some level. Because there's a lot of companies who just don't say anything about sustainability. And those are the brands to be worried about, because no one's going out and like getting mad at them for the most part. It's usually the brands that are claiming sustainability that people are judging really aggressively. So I think it's on the customer a little bit. And then, yeah, like you said, shopping local or shopping with designers and brands that the owners or know the people that are actually making your clothing. Because when you come in and see how a garment's made, you're going to appreciate it more. And you also understand how it's made. And like, that person because you might see them out at a restaurant. You're like, of course they're getting paid decently well. They're here. And it's like, just knowing your customer and knowing the employees, I think is really big. And that challenging. I ask questions now when I buy something from someone. I'll email and just say, hey, I'm looking at getting this. How is it made? And And usually, if someone's not going to tell you, it's probably not someone you want to be buying stuff from. So I just would say customers to challenge or at least ask as many questions to the company that you're going to get it from. But those certifications are important, I think, for bigger brands. I don't really know the number. Like if they have more than 50 people, maybe it's good. I don't really know, but they are expensive. They're hard to go through. I mean, I spent weeks just getting my certificate, like trying to get my B Corp. And then it was like, it may take 6 months. And it's like, I barely have enough time to make all the garments that we currently have to make a living for myself. So not that it's not a priority, but it is something that's like, we're doing all those things I feel like are maybe even better in some capacity. Like we're good for now, but if we get to that point, I always try to revisit usually annually if it's worth it at that point. But yeah, I think it's important, but not necessarily the end all be all.
I agree. I think it's just one way to hold the bigger brands accountable, which we have to do. But honestly, I think it's a small way to hold them accountable because I think that they're eventually going to need regulation and things like that to really hold them accountable in all areas, because transparency is just showing what's happening. It's not necessarily correcting what's happening or building a better system. And so I do think we have to hold the big brands accountable, but don't say that that's the end all be all, like Ethan said, that at any moment, shopping local and someone that can actually communicate their supply chain is always going to be better.
Perfect. So I think we're probably going to come down to the end of our time here today. So what I want to do is I want to take a question from Hannah. And I kind of want to use that to pose maybe the last question that we asked the group. And I also, before we get there, I want to speak to Ethan's process. He's not lying when he says, we want to work with all sizes. I'm 6 foot tall. I have slightly longer arms. I wanted a hoppy coat that I loved, and he made one for me with longer arms. And there was no question about it. I'm like, this looks kind of weird on me. Can we do it? And he says, yeah, we'll just add a couple inches. We'll get it done. I'll call you when it's done. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know this was a thing, and so he's not lying when he says that's what he does. I have firsthand experience with that. But Hannah's question was, what can non-fashion and even consumer brands do to support equity and sustainability? And so then my question in that would be, as we kind of close out our time here, I want to move towards actionable items, and actionable steps. And so not only what can non-fashion brands do to support, but what are some things that, individuals and brands and groups can do to move closer towards sustainability? So again, this is a question for all three of you. We'll go Camila, Ethan, then Harry. But what are actionable items, maybe one or two per person, that people can take to step towards sustainability? And if you want to speak to what can non-fashion brands do to support equity and sustainability as well.
Okay, so of course I said shop local, center Black and brown voices. And then also, if you are participating in quote unquote sustainable fashion, whether you're upcycling or buying something thrift, or you shopped at one of these places, when you're, you have a circle of influence. So if you're posting something on Instagram or you're talking to people, like tell them why you did it and what the benefits are. Because just like communicating that will help to get other people involved in the movement. And the biggest thing that I can say, because individuals can do a lot, but they can only do so much, I would say vote. Because there's no way that we can break down these systems if we're not actively being vocal and voting and being involved with breaking down some of these bigger brands.
Yeah, I think that's super important. That's like the big picture, and those are huge things I think that we need to be making. I think more like, how can I be very specific and niche oriented within my world right now? And again, voting, yeah, get out and vote. I've early voted over at Casa Azafran if you need a space. But I think for me, I always tell my friends, I heard this advice from someone else, was you should spend your dollar at places you want other people that you know that would buy from you. They don't necessarily are going to buy from you, but like restaurants, like I try to go to restaurants that I believe I know the chef, or I know the owner, I know how they're treating their employees. So spending there means that you're going to feed money into brands that aren't necessarily fashion. They in return are going to make more money, and they're going to use their dollar at another brand that's hopefully similar. And then basically like those microeconomies, I think, are going to expand and being used at other places. So that's why Nashville, especially as a city, is cool, because it's a massive city, but you see all like-minded people usually at the same hubs, not during COVID, but in times before that. I think that a big thing is being able to spend your dollar anywhere that you feel like is an ethical brand, regardless of fashion, regardless of food, whatever it is. But spending your dollar is the way that I think everyone hears on an economy scale, but then also like a relationship scale too. Is I've had so many great customers through COVID just reach out and say, like, when I needed you, you came and bought from me. How can I help you? So I feel like that's the best way on a real like local scale. And on the global scale too, is like, yeah, like hearing people, I've never had more serious discussions about racial injustice in the past 6 months than I've ever had. I mean, I even met with Manny. We sat on the couch with masks and just talked about real life things that we don't normally get to talk about, because it kind of goes under the rug. So for me, I'm a diverse owned business, but I don't talk about that stuff all the time. And it's kind of been a gut punch to be like, we should just talk about it more and be more involved on that side of things. So I think it's just having open conversations with folks, and truly honestly doing that from an empathetic point of view, then also just spending your dollar at the correct businesses. If like me as a brand, I'm doing all these sustainable things or trying to do as best I can, then I go out and spend it at Zara or H&M, like that's the break in the chain. So like my wife, we have a kid and we're trying to buy stuff for our kid, and we know that he's going to grow out of it quick. So we're like constantly fighting to just reuse clothes from friends and buy stuff that's more sustainable. But there's moments she's like, this cute outfit from Zara, and I'm like, oh no, like we can't buy from them, because then that dollar is going to be spent in the wrong place. So that's a constant struggle. And I think that we're thinking about it and talking about it and trying to do that as best we can. And that's the main thing, at least for me, is just spending it at the right places, because that dollar goes a long way eventually. So that's the goal that we try to do, at least as a company here.
I totally agree with what both of you guys said. I think you guys said it very well. I wanted to pull up. There's this company called Pasco that's run by Patrick Robinson, and he really promotes sustainability, and also just overall make a better choice, and like what Ethan was saying, spend with your dollars. And I think if we all make these choices, all of us together, just like voting, if we all come together and do this, I think we can make change. So all of the discussions that have been happening lately, I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about the future, but I think, make a better choice. And Pasco is also a great company, so check it out.
And before we kind of end everything, I just want to add an actionable step. I think it's so awesome to be in relationship with who you buy from. And so I think that will help as you start to think about where you buy outside of those relationships. I've come to know Harry and Ethan over the last several years, and they're just awesome people. And I'm very curious about what they do and how they do their work, and their creative process and all of that sorts of thing. And so when I go to other places, I'm like, oh, wait, I know someone that could probably, hem these pants for me. I know someone that, I know is working towards their goal of owning that business and making ends meet for their family. And so, and even Camila, who works with the Tennessee Mid-State Craft, Association and whatnot, and has such broad knowledge, of sustainability, of, the small business, of makers and artisans. Being in a relationship with all three of these people has just proven so beneficial. So I think another thing that we all could do is, the makers that you want to buy from, the small people, get to know them, ask them what their process is. Ask them if you can come in. COVID may make this hard now. We'll say tour a facility, but may not be able to do that right now. But how can I get insider knowledge to what you guys do? And I want to learn about your process. So I think for me, that has been so beneficial in the way I shop and the way I interact with these individuals as well. So, but with that, I think that is the end of our time. And I think we got it pretty spot on here, guys. So I think we've had a great conversation. Thank you for your questions in the Q&A section. I also tagged everyone on the panel today in the chat. So if you want to go to Instagrams, look them up. I know I love to talk and chat over social media, so hit me up anytime. I'm sure Harry, Camila, and Ethan will feel the same way. But please do what you can, research the companies, talk to the makers, and like Harry said, make better choices. And I think we can all work towards a better future. And I'll give it to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Yeah, please, if I think this speaks for all of us. If you have questions, reach out to us. You can, if you go to my website, my cell phone is at the bottom. So you can call me, you can text me, email me, all the things. Because
I'm going to hit you up. I'm going to flood you with text.
Oh, man. Oh, but anybody can reach out. I prefer that. I would rather be more engaged with my customers. That's why we do it. I think is just to be involved in people like Manny's life and in our relationships, because then it just makes it all worth it. So sorry, Hannah, do your thing.
Well, thank you guys so much. You all were absolutely amazing. Harry, Ethan, Camila, and Manny. Thank you guys so much for all of your insightful words. And I personally learned so much about what you guys do and your processes and stuff. So very, very, very cool. So thanks for everyone else who participated in this panel. And coming up next, we have an event that's in partnership with Austin Design Week called Reshaping the Face of Design, and that's at 11:30. So feel free to join us for that. And thanks again to everyone. Have a good week.